crime fighter in the Bronx, making history and breaking barriers. Darcel Clarke is the first new Bronx district attorney in 27 years. She's the first woman to hold the position and the first African-American woman to become a district attorney throughout New York State.
I am Darcel D. Clarke, Bronx District Attorney.
Before a packed auditorium inside Lehman College, leaders from all across the city, state, and courts gathered to bear witness to a prodigal daughter returning home. Officially sworn in as the 13th District Attorney for the Bronx, Darcel Clarke is the first woman to ever hold the position and the first African-American woman to hold the office in the entire state of New York.
And to carry out the duties and responsibilities
of the office of
District
Attorney of the County of the Bronx.
District Attorney of the County of the Bronx.
Hey, welcome to The Morning Stretch. I'm your host, Tony Herbert. We're honored to be joined today by a real historic figure, Bronx District Attorney Darcel Clarke. Ms. Clarke is the first African-American woman to hold the office of District Attorney in the history of New York State. And I'd like to welcome you today.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Now, we talked a little while ago, we talked about you being a Bronxite, born and raised and what have you. What was your experience with regards to, I'm from Brooklyn, and what we heard about was the Bronx is on fire and all that stuff, and you lived through that. What was that experience?
You lived through it, but we didn't really know we were living through it.
Right.
I grew up in public housing in the Soundview projects, as we called it back then.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just a great community in which to raise your families. It was safe. Everybody knew whose child was out there.
Right.
If you got in trouble, somebody's mother told your mother, and by the time your mother came home, you were in trouble.
Oh, yeah.
Because they already knew. And everybody looked out for each other. You know, it was safe, although we had crime. It was safe, and we felt protected. You know,
Right.
the police were part of the community, and we got along. It was just a great place to grow up.
What sparked your interest and the aspirations of getting into the law field?
Well, you know, as a kid, I was pretty good in school, and you're always arguing on behalf of somebody. You know, you should be a lawyer. And, you know, I thought about it and said, you know, that might be something I wanted to do. I was always interested in social studies and politics. So I thought, where can that interest take me? And I thought the law would be a good example. But it wasn't until I was in high school and a friend of mine was stabbed on a city bus.
What
by
high
a
school
city
did you go
bus
to?
driver.
What high school?
I went Truman High School.
Oh, Truman,
Park City.
okay.
Right. Stabbed by a city bus driver, and I had to be a witness in a grand jury.
Ooh.
And the bus driver was not indicted. And that's when I decided not only did I want to be a criminal lawyer, but I wanted to be a prosecutor because I wanted to make sure that victims of crimes were always protected and that their voice could be heard.
Now, you chose to be an Eagle in Boston College.
Yes.
And what have you. So tell us what that experience was, all the way from the Bronx to Boston to go to school in law school.
Well, it was interesting. I went in 1979, and still the schools were desegregating. They were desegregating the schools, so it was a big busing issues happening there. And everybody's like, why are you going to Boston? You know, black girls should not go to Boston. Well, anytime somebody told me I couldn't do something, that meant I had to do it. So that was the first time really that I left the Bronx to go to school at Boston College.
Wow.
And it was quite an interesting experience. I was the only one in many of my classes. Is a predominantly white school, but I got a very good education at BC, and I love it until this
You
day.
hopped a little bit down I-95 and you went right into Howard University.
Well, you know, after being at BC for 4 years and never being anywhere else, I was able to see that culturally it didn't meet the needs that I needed. Coming from New York City, a New York City kid, I needed something that was more culturally in tune to who I was as a black woman. So I said I wanted to go to law school either in a black city or a black school. So what better than Washington, D.C. and Howard? Plus, it's the Mecca.
So straight out of school, what was the first job? Did you work in, did you clerk? How did that work for you?
First job out of law school was an assistant DA in the Bronx.
Oh, okay.
And now I'm the DA.
Wow.
Yeah,
And you
so
brought
I've
that
come full
experience.
circle. Yeah.
So what's different now as a prosecutor today with regards to crime from yesterday? What's different in the crime?
Well, you know, the crimes are the same. It's actually less crime now than it was then. I started in 1986. That was right in the middle of the crack era.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
And I was a narcotics prosecutor for 10 of my 13 years as an assistant DA.
Oh,
and
okay.
back then, being a prosecutor, you know, the mentality was nail them and jail them. So the police bring them in. We were the prosecutors. Our job was to prosecute, get the highest jail sentence possible because that was what was going to make our community safe. Fast forward now, 32 years later, I'm the DA Crime is down lower than ever before. We still have our problems with violence and drugs, but it's different. And the mentality now of a 21st century prosecutor is not nail them and jail them. It is, what is at the heart of this case? What does justice look like now? And justice means, as a prosecutor, charging somebody. Justice also may mean not charging somebody. Justice also looks like diverting somebody out of the system once they come in. Justice means treatment for people that need mental health or drug addiction. So it means a lot of different things now. It's not go to jail, throw away the key. We're not doing that anymore.
Cool. So now you're from Soundview.
Yes.
Is that the Soundview section or Soundview Houses?
Soundview Houses.
Soundview Houses. We talked briefly a little bit. How is that coming out of what people would say the projects? We say housing developments,
Right.
and being this young black girl going to college, coming back, and now being a prosecutor. Do you come across people that you've either grown up with in the system, and how did that work for you, and how did you handle that?
Well, it's interesting that you asked me, and not only did I come out of the projects, but my goal was to come back and help those same people that I grew up with. So of course I see them all the time, and not only I spent 13 years as an assistant DA, but then 16 years after that I was a judge. So 13 years I presided over criminal cases in Bronx County. So I always saw people I grew up with either as witnesses, victims, defendants, jurors, you name
Right.
it. And to me, as a judge, I sat up there, but I didn't live up there. So I still lived in the same community that I served, and that was what was important to me.
Right.
So now going to this job, that's what has given me the perspective to be more fair and balanced, because I've seen it not only as an advocate, but also as the judge who presided over matters, to listen to the defense side, to listen to the prosecution side, and really being able to have a sense of what is fair for the case. And that's how I now conduct myself as the chief law enforcement officer in Bronx, as the district attorney.
Well, that's an interesting transition. You're an attorney. You go from the attorney to the prosecutors, then you become a judge.
Yes.
What have you. How long did you sit on the bench?
16 years.
16. And in the criminal court?
I sat 13 years in criminal, together in the trial courts, 13 years, criminal court and Supreme Court criminal, and then 3 years as an appellate judge.
And then what made you decide to run for district attorney?
Well, I always knew that it was a job that I could do, that I would want to do. My predecessor, Rob Johnson, was there 27 years. I knew him well. I worked for him 10 out of my 13 years as an assistant. He's a friend and a mentor. And I would never have run against him because I think that he served the Bronx well. But when he decided that he did not want to pursue another term as district attorney, people reached out to me and said, you would be the perfect fit. You have all of the qualifications. And I had to seriously think about it. I'm married, my husband, NYPD, 36 years in the department now. He's still working as a detective. I sat down with my family, said, what do you think? And everybody said to me, you've waited your whole life for this kind of job. And when the opportunity came, I took that leap of faith. I had to leave the bench in order to run. No guarantee that I would win. We know that elections are not guaranteed.
Not at all. Not in this city.
Yeah, so, I decided to run, and, thank God I finished with 86% of the vote and took office 2016.
Now, we do a focus group, and we ask questions of people that live in the community. So I asked the question of a young lady who lives in Co-op City. And the question is, there is a belief in the black community and Latino community, that there is a bias towards officers and how cases are presented to the grand juries. Now, which they believe is, let me take these off because I'm getting a little old. There's a bias towards officers and how cases are presented to the grand juries, which they believe is why indictments are not produced in the case of, like, Eric Garner, for example. Is there truth to that? And why is it a popular saying that a prosecutor could indict a ham sandwich if he or she wanted?
Well, I don't know about that ham sandwich thing, because being a prosecutor, I can tell you we've presented cases where the grand jury has decided not to return indictments. So that's not always the case. As far as the killing of Eric Garner, that's what happened in Staten Island. I don't know what went wrong with there, but I know that I was faced with the same thing as a mentally ill woman who was killed by the police in the Soundview section. And I pursued charges. I did a thorough investigation. Took 8 months to investigate it. But after the death, I sat down with the community and asked them to be patient with me, give me time to really investigate it, and let me follow the evidence where it led me. And I did that, and after that investigation, the grand jury in the Bronx returned an indictment against that police sergeant. Now, the case went to trial, we didn't win, but it was still, a message to the police department, is a message to the community that I'm going to be fair and I'm going to follow the evidence wherever it takes me, no matter who it helps or hurts, because that's what they elected me to do. So, the perception, it depends on the community that you're in. If you take the time to reach out to the community, to meet them where they are, the perspective will be different from that community as opposed to another community where the DA doesn't do that.
Wow. Bronx District Attorney Darcel Clarke will be right back after this.
Here in New York today, a stunning development in a murder case NBC News has been following for nearly 3 years. A man freed this past spring after being wrongfully imprisoned for 2 decades shocked a Bronx courtroom today by asking a judge not to throw out the case against him. Telling me in an exclusive interview he is determined to expose where and how the justice system went wrong. Richard Rosario is free, but still a prisoner to the memories of 20 years behind bars for a wrongful conviction. Obviously, your best day was getting out of prison. What was the lowest day?
Every time I think about that cell.
Today, in a Bronx courtroom, as prosecutors tried to right the wrong and formally dismiss the murder case against him, Rosario did the unthinkable. He asked for the murder case against him to remain open until his name is cleared.
The public should know the truth. The families of the victims should have that clarity and that peace of mind that, a murderer is not in the street and that their son received the justice that he deserved.
Rosario's surprise break came this past March after his lawyers from the Exoneration Initiative convinced brand new Bronx DA Darcel Clarke to take a fresh look at the case.
You are hereby released. Back at you right here at the Morning Stretch with, that's right, the Honorable District Attorney, Ms. Darcel Clarke. So question for you, let's get into that whole concept of justice reform. First and foremost, at what point, because I know that you took a position with regards to the whole wrongful conviction issue that has actually plagued our city. Tell us a little bit about that and why you took the positions you took.
Well, I know that having been a judge and presided over trials that, errors can be made. And with the technology that we have now, there's not a lot more ways to prove cases than they were 20 and 30 years ago. And as a prosecutor now in the 21st century, you have to be, smart enough to know that you have to own what you've done, whether it's in the past or going forward. So knowing that, I knew that it was important that we have a mechanism in my office to review wrongful convictions because it is happening all over the country and it's part of the criminal justice reform platform. So I started a conviction integrity unit as soon as I took office. And actually before I took office, the Exoneration Initiative came to me with a case of Richard Rosario and said, please, if you get elected, can you please look into this? And 2 weeks into my being elected and taking office, I sent a team of lawyers and investigators down to Florida to investigate the case of Richard Rosario, who did 20 years in jail for a homicide in the Bronx. And my team interviewed 9 out of the 10 witnesses that he had the day he was arrested. He had alibi witnesses and nobody ever interviewed them. So I sent the team, and after doing that thorough investigation, we believed that he was not the right person, and I exonerated him and have him released from prison.
Now, is that like the catalyst for the need for criminal justice? I mean, is there a need for criminal justice reform?
Absolutely. I mean, nothing is perfect. No system that we have is perfect. And we can always use, renovations in anything that you do. So I think it's important to, keep a fresh outlook and a present and current outlook on the things that we do. And that even means looking back as to the things, how we did things before and learning from best practices on how to go forward to do the things that we do today.
But where is it most needed?
What do you mean most needed?
Criminal justice reform. Is it across the board, or is it just in the Black and Latino communities, or is it across the board that everybody needs to have access?
Everybody needs to have access, equal access, and it has to be fair treatment of everybody. So there lies the real need for the reform, because you see the inequities in the criminal justice system itself. I mean, we can't turn a blind eye to the racial disparities and, economic disparities that exist in the criminal justice system. Access to some and access to none is not a good thing. So we need to reform it to make sure that it's fair and equitable for anybody who has to come into the system.
I'll go back to the forum, and particularly on this issue. Now, there are proponents. This is Alicia from Mott Haven. The proponents for jail reform are focused almost exclusively on Rikers Island, which is in your jurisdiction.
Yes.
You entered from Queens, although Rikers Island is technically in the Bronx. Jail is the last stop in that process. How did it become the first stop in the conversation?
Well, because a lot of times people are charged with things, and if they cannot, make bail, they end up sitting in Rikers Island or local jails until pre-detention, until their case is resolved. Looking forward now and looking at the way we did things before, it's important to know that people that are charged with low-level, nonviolent crimes should be able to continue to live in the community while they're waiting for, to answer the charges that are brought against them. There are others where the jails are needed, quite frankly. I mean, the jails are there for a purpose, but not for everybody. We need to make sure that people that don't belong in Rikers Island should not be there. So
let me ask this question as a follow-up. What do you see Rikers Island right now? There's such a push to close it. Why?
Because of the horrors that have happened there,
okay.
And it's antiquated, it's dangerous, there's some issues of corruption. There's like a lot of things going wrong there, and not a lot of things going well. So it needs to be fixed. But there's a push that it's been open too long, and that people don't need to necessarily be in jail while waiting trial. So there was a movement to close it, and I supported that. And I'm doing what I can to make sure that those who don't belong there, that come from cases that I've charged, are not there.
But there's the premonition or the thought process that the violence that's in Rikers is going to stop once they close Rikers Island. That's going to go wherever they open up the jails. I mean, is that not a fair statement?
No, I agree. But I mean, I think that corrections is also a place where reform needs to happen, and the approaches need to be different. There are jails all over the country that are working without the violence that we see at Rikers Island, and I think there needs to be some changes in how we run the jails as well, and all stakeholders need to take part in that discussion to make it a safer place for people to have to work and live there. And I've been a proponent of that. I've worked with the Department of Corrections, the Board of Corrections, the corrections unions. I want to see the place safe. As long as it's open, Rikers, it has to be safe. And I've worked very hard to get that done. Recently, the state legislature has now passed a public health law now that where the jails can now have these scanners.
That's what you talked about.
Where they can now see some of the weapons that are being smuggled in to the jails that are causing, mayhem in the jails. And I think that's going to be a helpful tool. But that's not the only thing. There's a whole lot of other things that need to happen.
Well, you put a task force together out of your office to oversee the issues in Rikers.
Yes.
And what have you? Now, what were they charged with? What's their responsibility and the goal?
Well, the first thing I did is that knowing that Rikers Island was under my jurisdiction, when I promised that when I ran that in order to investigate the violence and the corruption and the crimes that may be happening on Rikers Island, I can't do it from 161st Street. So the first thing I did was open an office on Rikers Island. So my office is physically on the island. And I have assistant DAs and investigators that work there that process the case and investigate the cases there. So now we are there in real time. Right. Which wasn't happening before. So there was a backlog of the cases and, just not being able to secure the witnesses that we need to go forward on the cases that we have. So that was important to do. But at the same time, meeting with the stakeholders, everybody plays a role in this, and everybody has to take ownership of it. And as we, got together to start seeing what can be done by everybody to make sure that we continue to make the jail safe.
If they were able to stop the violence in Rikers, does it make the case that Rikers shouldn't be closed?
You know, that's not up to me. I mean, the violence, violence is only one part of it. There's still going to be pretrial detention. The problem also with Rikers is that it's so far away. And it's difficult. It takes a whole day for people at times to go and visit their loved ones in Rikers.
But should we make that convenient for people, what have you, when they've committed a crime, that we make it convenient for them to see their family members?
Well, it's just, you got to remember that people that are involved in the criminal justice system, it's just not the defendant and the victim. There's a whole community that's involved in it. You have the families of each of those people. You have the community where the people live. So therefore, you need to make it so that it's fair and accessible to everyone that has to be involved.
I want to come back to that, but also want to jump into this as well. This is from somebody in Soundview. The face of criminal justice reform in New York City is Kalief Browder. Even when you research yourself on Wikipedia, you can't get away from your connection to that case. How did the criminal justice system fail Kalief Browder? Talk to our audience a little bit about your connection to this case and what should have been done differently, if anything.
Well, first of all, I'd like to say it was a tragedy that happened to Kalief Browder, and I'm very sorry for that. And I've said that publicly to the family.
Right.
But you're right; it is something that there was a failure of the system as a whole, the courts, the Department of Corrections, the defense bar. So many people had a role in that, and it is something that is systemic in the criminal justice system, and another reason why we need to have reform. We need to do things better. Things need to be faster, speedier. Again, pretrial detention. Was he somebody that really should have been detained pre-trial? Is he somebody that could have been held in the community and brought back? These are the things that we're changing now, the way that we do those things. Judges have to preside over those cases, but there's a prosecutor and a defense attorney that each have a role. The DA's role is to be ready to bring forth the charges and be ready to take it to trial. The defense attorney to defend the defendant. In this case, there were just lapses everywhere. The defense attorney never filed the motions that would have the court decide whether or not he should be released. The people, the DA's office had a witness, and then the witness disappeared, and they didn't keep up with the vitality of their cases to make sure they had a viable case. And the courts can only do but so much on their own. You have the power to do it, but that's why there are attorneys there. So with that all, it was just a perfect storm to just end up being where it was, and it's tragic. But going forward, being a DA now and knowing that I presided over that case, over the 3-year period that was there. I was on the case in the beginning. But who knew, as you do that, it's going to end up being a case that lasts 3 years later, and the tragedy that actually happened to him. But we got to be focused enough now to know when you're presiding over a case, when you're the DA and you're charging on a case, you have to keep it current to understand what is going on with the case at all times. And when things change, that's when you have to make the court aware of it, you make the defense attorney aware of it, and the defense, the same thing. Something happens with your client, let the court know, let the DA know, so we can do something in real time.
As I look back on here, one of our favorite guests, Michelle Eskenazi, president of the New York State Bail Bondsmen Association, appeared on our show and basically said that Kalief Browder could not have been released because he was being held on a VOP. Violation of what? Probation or parole?
Yes.
Well, what happened with Kalief Browder happened by virtue of something we call judicial discretion. Okay. In the judge's discretion, decided that the defendant was in violation of probation. So on the VOP docket, the judge remanded Kalief Browder on that docket. On the new charge, he set $3,000 bail. So what happens in terms of the story is that no one's talking about the fact that even if he made the $3,000 bail, it wouldn't have mattered. He still would have been held. He was remanded on the VOP.
So your hands weren't tied if, in fact, that you were acting according to the law, correct?
No, I was acting according to the law, but without a motion, I would, even if there was no VOP and he couldn't afford the bail, the judge can't just say, well, release the person. Now, eventually, after the judge does a number of things and, order the people to be ready or the defense to file motions, things could have been done, but it wasn't. And the violation of probation is real. A lot of people don't know about the violation of probation part of it. And that is what ended up keeping him there. It was the fact that he had the probation because he was on probation for a prior felony. But be that as it may, still, like in my office now, I make sure that I meet with my chiefs once a week, or we have meetings to find out, the viability of our cases. And they've been instructed now, every 30 days, you look at that case. If somebody's in jail, should they still be in there? Has anything changed in our cases? And if they are, you bring that to the attention of your supervisors and ultimately to me to make a decision whether or not we should go in the same course that we have.
Do you feel that you've been unfairly criticized because of this case?
I don't say unfairly criticized, yes, because I couldn't do anything, but I'm going to own the fact that I was part of the process. And using that as an example, helping me to run my office differently so that there'll never be another Kalief Browder again, if I can help it.
We'll be right back after this.
During the AIDS crisis, cities across the country had needle exchange programs to make sure drug addicts didn't spread AIDS with dirty needles. Now the opioid crisis, more overdoses in New York City than car crashes, suicides, and murders combined, and now a plan to open supervised injection centers to prevent overdoses. Nowhere does this exist.
In New York City last year, more than 1,400 people died of a drug overdose. The mayor wants to get addicts help with 4 new injection sites that would permit illegal drugs.
What's clear to me is this will save lives. We will see a number of people who would otherwise have died of an overdose be in a setting where they can be saved.
The 4 sites would be in Midtown West, Washington Heights, Park Slope, and the Bronx. It must all be approved by the governor, his health department, and district attorneys.
It depends on how it's done, right? We went through this with the needle exchange with my father.
The idea has already angered many. The congressman in Staten Island called it liberal insanity, that it'll set us back further in the drug fight, and his opponent in next month's election blasted the mayor.
This is another bad example of a mayor that is completely out of touch with the people that actually live here.
I think it's fair for people to immediately think, what the hell are people talking about here?
The council speaker knows the issue's emotional. On Wednesday, one council member was arrested protesting in favor of a site. The feds are opposed to the idea, even though it has worked in other cities.
And instead of shooting up in alleyways or public parks or public bathrooms, we want to connect them to care where hopefully they can get off of drugs.
So far, we don't know when or even if these 4 sites will ever open in New York. So far, San Francisco already has 2 sites. Philadelphia gets their injection site next year.
We're back with District Attorney Darcel Clarke. As you see, we're just giving you a little bit of information and what have you on this aspiring career here. You know, we recently discussed a lot of issues of jail reform and bail reform in our show, and there are 2 cases that we really just can't come to grips with. In particular, we've struggled with as a show. And we know you can't discuss specifics of these cases, so I won't put you in that position. But one such case does come to mind is that of 47-year-old Richard DeLeon. And I'm looking at a clip here on the issue that related to him, a livery cab driver who had his thumb cut off during a vicious assault as he was trying to protect his passengers, one of whom was actually cut during the attack. One of his assailants was released on $200 bail and even bragged about it on internet, said that I made it home in time for dinner. You know, can you elaborate on some of that? As to what should we do in these situations where we have such low bails and these guys are getting out and able to go back and probably commit another crime?
I mean, I can't speak to that because the bail is the purview of the court. I mean, as a district attorney, I can't speak to that case per se, but I could just explain the process is that people are charged with, crimes. They go before the court at the arraignment, and the district attorney recites the facts and makes a recommendation on bail based on, a number of factors. And we will, perhaps ask the judge to, set bail in a particular amount. The defense attorney gives their recitation of why it should not or the person should be released, and it's up to the court to decide. So, the amount of bail set is up to the court. So I could have asked for $1 million, but if that judge set 200, there's nothing that I could do.
And the other thing I'm referencing too is we have the Quinn Thomas, a New York City corrections officer, who was brutally assaulted on the subway in the Bronx, even after identifying herself to the assailant as a New York City officer. He ended up taking her badge during the assault, although Officer Thomas later learned that your office chose to release the assailant under his own recognizance.
The Bronx DA's office charged Allen with robbery, but only misdemeanor assault. Thomas learned from us that he'd been released. This document shows he got out on his own recognizance. The DA's office says there was some bail. An emotional Thomas recorded a meeting with 2 assistant district attorneys who informed her they were going to offer Allen a deal of probation with a couple of months in jail.
You can't do that. I can't do that.
I've seen people in this county punch someone like you and cause death to that person and walk away with a misdemeanor and 2 years probation.
The president of the Correction Officers Union is outraged at the minor assault charge.
This guy should be in jail. I think the Bronx District Attorney's office screwed up. I think they made a mistake.
Why would that have been the case?
Well, again, I'm
You
not
can't
going
speak-
to
you
talk
can't- right.
about a particular case, but again, it's not the DA's office that releases anybody.
Okay.
It's up to the court.
That's what we want, clarity on it, so we give an
it's the
opportunity.
court that sets the bail. And I can tell you, I was a judge. Did it 16 years, I know. You know, and it's up to the court to listen to both sides and make a determination on whether or not bail should be set. And the purpose of bail is to make sure that somebody returns to court. So the court looks at a number of things, their record, the severity of the case.
But who
their
agrees
ties
to the bail?
community.
You make a recommendation on
I make
bail,
a recommendation.
and then the judge takes it from that aspect.
I make a recommendation, the defense attorney will say why they don't think bail should be set or ask for a lower bail than requested, and the judge makes the final determination.
Right.
It's the judge, not the lawyers.
Oh, interesting. He paid his bail, got out, and basically committed. I'm not thinking that's not the same situation, but there was another individual case where an individual got out of jail and went and committed another crime. How do we protect our citizens?
I mean, all we can do is continue to investigate, continue to charge when they do wrongdoing, and bring it to the court's attention. If somebody is out on bail on one case and then they commit another crime, the penal law allows the court not only to set more bail, not only to set bail, but they could increase it. They could set no bail, because while out on a case, you commit a violent crime. You know, therefore, you know, you're a danger to the community, or you are not somebody that is somebody that is going to necessarily return to court, because now you have 2 cases. Or you return to court with a new case is not a good thing in the eyes of the court. So it's up to the judge.
I got you. Now, Iris out of Hunts Point says, now we know you can't discuss the details of ongoing cases. We got that. But please explain to the viewers what factors go into a decision to offer someone a sentence similar to this, 2 months in jail and probation, for someone who assaults anyone, much less a New York City officer who identifies him or herself, or releasing someone on $200 bond. Wow, that's a good question. After being involved in an assault where a man violently loses his thumb.
But you said we offered, the offer was 2 months in jail and probation?
2 months. That's what we were told. 2 months, offer someone a sentence similar to this.
Okay, again, you know, the sentence is up to the court. Now, it is up to the DA to do the plea bargaining. So we can, you know, negotiate with the defense as to a sentence. But we do that in consultation with a victim, especially if we have a victim case, because we know that they have a vested interest in it. We are their lawyers for the victims, and we will, you know, assess the case based on, you know, the factors that happen with the case, as well as in consultation, you know, with the victim. Sometimes the courts, again, the judge can take it out of our hands. So it may be that I may be offering them a lower charge with a particular sentence, but they could plead guilty to the entire indictment. But it's the type of sentence where the judge can take it out of my hands, let them plead to the top charge, and the judge can figure out what the sentence will be.
So
I don't have control
Should
over
we be
that.
concerned that the judges are releasing, or we as citizens, that we should be concerned because they're releasing violent criminals back out on our streets?
Well, that is something that you have to, you know, deal with the judiciary. They're held accountable to the public, just like all the rest of public servants.
Now, is there some form of political pressure being put on officers like yours, you know, via the mayor and the governor, with regards to releasing these offenders with the purposes of meeting their goal to close Rikers Island, to get to that magical number of 5,000?
No, I don't. You know, I'm not going to release somebody just for the sake of because people want to close Rikers Island. My job, first and foremost, is public safety as a district attorney.
Okay.
And anything that I'm doing is going to have that in mind first and foremost. So if there's somebody who I think is charged with a low-level nonviolent crime that can be in our community and not be a threat to public safety while they're waiting for their case to be adjudicated, I could understand them remaining in the community until the case is heard and not necessarily have to be in Rikers Island. But again, if there's a threat to public safety, you better believe I'm on the side of caution to make sure that the public and my witnesses and my victims remain safe from anyone who's been accused of causing harm to them.
Another one of your Bronx. Now, the mayor recently announced a pilot for what was typically known as a shooting gallery back in the day. So you've had to deal with a lot of that in your judicial experience. A safe place where heroin users can inject their drugs.
Right.
Now, one is heroin possession. Is that still illegal?
It is illegal.
Okay.
Very much so.
Now, that is a federal law, correct?
That's a state law as well.
Really?
No, yeah. Heroin is a controlled substance in New York State. And
so help me to understand this, and I'm going to draw from your conventional wisdom. How does the mayor of this city, Mayor de Blasio, circumvent federal law and carve out a legal space for heroin possession? And does that complicate your opportunities of prosecution?
It does, because like you said, there's the state laws and the federal laws. So even if New York State decided that these safe injection sites could be legal in New York State, there's still a federal law that could come in and shut them down, prosecute the people that run the safe injection sites, prosecute the people that are going in with their drugs in order to use them. You know, the police department can still arrest people for it because it's a crime in New York State. So it is a complicated issue. I am not in favor of those things.
A law student out of St. John's, Jonathan Sanders, is asking the question, and I'll follow up with it as well. I mean, you do still prosecute drug dealers, right?
Yes, I
Okay.
do.
So how does that work if I say I'm a heroin dealer and I sell someone heroin outside one of these facilities where a person can legally shoot up and the person I sell it to then goes inside? Is what I've done illegal because it's legal for them to shoot up in there, right? I mean, do the cops go inside the facility to retrieve the evidence for your office, which you need to make the arrest for them having that possession? Does this work as a legal matter?
Complicated, very
Extremely.
complicated, yeah, complicated. And so far, it's not legal in New York, so right now I don't have to deal with that. The person who sells it can be arrested, and you know, we deal on the supply side to make sure that we don't have these drugs coming into our communities because it's destroying our communities. In the Bronx with heroin, this is not something new.
Right.
So, you know, right now is a big push, it's a public health problem, only because it's ending up in communities now where it had never been before.
Right.
But in the Bronx, and I grew up here my whole life, we've always had.
Does that not make your
heroin
job
dealers.
tough, as well as the police officers, if they're being told that these facilities are legal, and yet here's somebody that just sold drugs outside?
No, it is complicated, and the police still have to do the enforcement, but it's not happening right now. And if it is, it's underground, and it's still illegal, and the police have the right to go forward and arrest people.
So you're a Bronx native. Yes. How do you remain optimistic about the safety of the people in the Bronx?
I remain optimistic because you know what? The Bronx has some very good people. It's a vibrant county with a very diverse community, and they're just real good people that are just genuine about loving their community and loving the people in their communities. So I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic with the young people that we have, where so many of us before have tried to get things done and haven't been able to make it happen. These young people are so sophisticated now. I'm just so hopeful when I look at the Parkland shooting, all these mass shootings we've had. We can't get the politicians to change the laws, but those young kids marched on Washington and really is starting to make an impact. And they're old enough now that they're starting to run for office, and they can do things differently. And when I meet with them and they ask me these questions and they're that engaged, that's what gives me hope.
So let me ask this question. You are the first African-American female district attorney for the Bronx. And when Darcel Clark, district attorney, how does the Bronx benefit from that?
Because, I'm one of them. I mean, every politician comes from that community, but I have just worked my whole life in public service. I mean, I went to college, I went to law school, I could have went anywhere. But what I wanted to do was come right back to the same community that I grew up in, because I wanted to be able to work in a career that had the most impact on the people in which I serve. And being an assistant district attorney, being a judge, and now the district attorney gives me the greatest opportunity to do.
It's interesting. I actually was looking at your resume as I have it outlined, and you're up for re-election and what have you. And I wish you luck on that, quite frankly. But let me ask you this. We have a number of people, a number of candidates running for New York State Attorney General. None who has the credentials you have, quite frankly. Why don't you put your name in the hat?
Because I got a job that I love. I love being the Bronx District Attorney.
Okay.
And, that was an opportunity that was there. Trust me, people reached out to me. My phone was blowing up. But I have a job to do. I was elected to be the DA of the Bronx. And that's what I'm going to do.
Don't get me wrong. I think we have some qualified people in there, but I don't think none with your credentials. So, I'm not trying to knock them and what have you. But, would you consider allowing us to throw your hat in the ring?
I have a job already. Thank you. Thank you, Tony. I have a job.
We appreciate. You know what? It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank
and
you
you've
so much
educated
for
a lot of
having me.
us, and we've had some great, great responses from you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Darcel Clarke. We'll be right back with my rant right after this. So there you have it. If I told you a minority female from the Bronx public housing took the legal justice system by storm, you'd probably think I was talking about Supreme Court Justice Sonia Sotomayor. But I'm not. Darcel Clarke is another history-making trailblazer from the Bronx, the Boogie Dam, the first African-American female to hold the office of district attorney in New York State history. That's like in over 200 years. No matter what circumstances you're born into, whether you live in NYCHA housing, which has been neglected for many years, or if you're one of the 28,000 children who sleep in New York City's homeless shelters every single night, let Darcel Clarke's example serve as an inspiration that no matter what your circumstances are, you can affect change. Now, while protesting or boycotting may be good options, and marching may seem even better, the best way to affect change is your direct involvement. You heard Ms. Clarke talk about her friend getting stabbed, and instead of leaving it in someone else's hands to fight for justice, she decided she wanted to make a difference herself. And she has, changing the way people are prosecuted and offering people alternatives who are on drugs or need mental health support. This is a new way of looking at all New Yorkers, even people of color. And she gave you insight into what goes into prosecuting a defendant. So we challenge you, our viewers, to make a difference, whether it's by joining a community organization, going to a meeting to affect positive change, or something as simple as casting a vote. Become the difference that matters and the change you call for. I know I have. What are you prepared to do?